begin.
Hello and welcome to episode 5 of SystemSoft's LinkedIn Live series, Ask an Expert. My name is Hank Lee and I'm a marketing manager here at SystemSoft Technologies. We are really happy to have you joining today. And as a reminder, you can always ask questions by submitting them in the comments section below. So today we're really excited and happy to have our resident expert, Whitney Church, joining us today. Hello, Whitney.
Hi.
Hey, thanks for joining today. Could you share a little bit about your background as a modern workplace solutions architect?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been working with SystemSoft since the beginning of the year, but I have been in this space where we do enterprise collaboration and work from anywhere solutions for about 15 years. Had the fortune to work directly with Microsoft. I was working with them in the early days of SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams, so I've really been able to see the evolution of all of these modern workplace solutions and develop all the best practices alongside with them and their solutions. So happy to be able to talk about this today.
Well, we're really glad to have you, and we've got a great audience today, and we've got some really important topics to discuss. Today we're talking about deployment, governance, and adoption of the Teams platform, right? So companies a lot of companies are in the middle of rethinking the workplace and trying to solve that problem right now. What does that mean?
So there's a lot of different ways. So first off, when we start talking about like a hybrid work from home model, there's a couple different aspects that we have to take into consideration. One of it is the technical side of it. How do you actually make a on-prem solution work with an on-cloud solution? And the other side of it is the practical solution. How do you make from a work from home atmosphere work with a cloud atmosphere? So today what we're talking about is what it means for a hybrid model from when it comes to working from home in a cloud atmosphere. And so companies have been moving really steadily towards creating a more digital workplace, more digital focused center for people over about the last half decade. Last year, we got a pretty unwelcome boost with the pandemic where people had to work from home or they would lose productivity. And that's certainly not something that companies wanted to see. And while Microsoft was offering the platform, companies have been slowly moving towards it, but had to kind of pull the trigger a little bit faster than they expected. So right now, what we've got is a little bit of a mishmash of people who had been planning for it and people who had to turn it on and looking to find the ways to have the best practices around what this environment looks like. Because essentially, this is the new normal. So we had been steadily moving towards it. We got a boost. But that doesn't mean that it's going away. It is something that companies should be taking into consideration that this is not a temporary solution, while some of their practices that they may have put in place to turn it on might be temporary. But a work life, home life, office, cloud balance has become the new standard. And so now it's important to start thinking about what that looks like as the new normal.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's a really good point. Everything has shifted now that we've gone into the pandemic, and companies have had to really consider what those options are. And I think there's the current situations that companies are facing. They're, in simple terms, there's really three ways that companies are looking at this, right? So some companies are returning to that in-person environment, and bringing people back into an office-centric work design. And for some organizations that are doing that, there's a high risk to that you could lose some of your workforce because the workforce has changed in the way they view that. Some companies are continuing with their current virtualized office-centric work design, which means they really didn't have a strategy and they're trying to figure out what to do with their existing infrastructure. And we feel like that's just an unsustainable model, and it leads to a high level of fatigue, right? Users get really fatigued being in those virtual environments that aren't really human-centric. But the preferred option would be to really create a new work design that's aligned with the reality of a hybrid environment that you mentioned, right? And that reduces fatigue and increases performance. So, Whitney, what are your thoughts on what is occurring?
So definitely last year saw a big change in the way that the workforce works with their organization. When they had the ability to work from home, it gave them a sense of safety and security. But then they started getting a little bit used to it. So there is some workplace fatigue because it's a little bit of the new normal. But people change their lives in a lot of different ways, not just from social distancing and not just from quarantining themselves, but they actually took the opportunity that now they had a malleable workspace, that they were able to move their families to different cities where they could maybe have a bigger house. They were able to make a lot of changes in their life when it came to work-life balance and maybe a nanny situation or a daycare situation where they were able to have more time with their children. There are a lot of different changes that happened over the last year that have to be taken into consideration in order to get that not only a positive workforce environment, but thinking about exactly what it looks like in the modern world and how we can sustain that.
Right. And like you said, organizations need to take a step back and rethink that strategy before jumping into it and then creating additional problems that they might have to solve later. So I want to talk a little bit about the current situation and what organizations are facing today, and and how these trends are being driven by that need for a more flexible workspace. So what we're seeing today is that nearly 2/3 of IT professionals are feeling overwhelmed trying to manage remote work. That's an important thing to note it, because IT becomes overloaded and managing devices across work from anywhere is becoming more and more challenging. And as a result of that, IT departments are planning to spend more on remote management technologies. And over half of those IT organizations are planning to spend more on security as well. So securing devices and managing in this remote environment does create new concerns for IT. And as we look at the remainder of 2021, the top priorities are adding that layered security so people can work from anywhere, and making remote work and device management easier. So when we think about these trends, what are the key pieces needed when considering deploying teams, right? That's part one. And what is the impact to the employee experience?
Gotcha. So one thing to take into consideration is Teams is really a robust collaboration solution. A lot of times people have been looking at it as that natural replacement for an older technology. So typically when Microsoft has rolled out a different product, they've rolled it out as an upgrade to what they had previously. So Teams, it was originally evangelized as a replacement for Skype for Business, or in the older days, Link. But there are so many more features about this that really make it an all-in-one solution for people to be able to have a chat platform, have a calling platform, have a document management system, be able to share files securely, be able to share files outside of the organization if that's allowed by your governance. There are a lot of different options when it comes to Teams that really creates it an all-in-one solution that allows for that seamless employee experience where they're able to get their job done in one place from all of their devices. So when an IT department is thinking about it, they should definitely be thinking about what they should be doing. When I say they, I mean their end users. What information they should be sharing there, how they want them to share it, and what permissions they want. And employees should be able to think about it as, a way to be able to access their information from anywhere, make sure they never lose anything because there's versioning. There are so many different possibilities with this product that have to be taken into consideration.
Right. I mean, like we said before, sit down, have a strategy, look at the ways that those employees need to access critical information, the way they collaborate with each other. All of these pieces are some of the bigger challenges that companies are facing today. And we look at what IT professionals are saying, managing this remote environment and building this hybrid workforce is really one of the biggest challenges they face today. And when we're talking about that, like you said, it's really important to provide that positive employee experience, right? And these trends that we're talking about, our IT departments are focused on ensuring a positive user experience, right? And it'll depend more and more on the utility of the cloud to support that. So the priority is to empower and secure those hybrid workspaces, right? That's what we've been talking about. And it's very important that employees have the tools, resources, and support they need. And part of what we wanted to discuss today is deployment and governance of teams. So let's talk a little bit more about that. What are some of the key areas that companies need to focus on?
Sure. So for deployment of teams, when it comes to a technical side of it, it's as long as you have the licenses for it, it's pretty easy just to turn it on. But the question should be, should you? And that brings us to the governance side of it. So there are a lot of different abilities that you have within the Teams admin center to be able to manage who can create channels, who can access information, all of these sort of things that make your environment sustainable. Because if you think about these before you actually hit the on button, that's going to drive your rollout plan. And then the other part of it is obviously has to do with the education and the adoption of it. Just because you're rolling out something new doesn't mean people know how to use it. So having a really hefty communications plan, making sure that the employees know what you're about to do and that they have the ability to self-train, have a guided training plan, whatever is best for your organization is really key, because that's one of the things that can run into is change management is difficult. So you can reduce confusion by definitely doubling up on your communication and also making sure that people know exactly how they're going to work with a product. Because first and foremost, we don't want productivity to be impacted. We want to make sure that they have a positive experience with this new platform instead of a negative experience where they can't find anything, it's confusing, they don't know how to operate it. So there's that adoption side of it, that's really the communication side of it. And then there's that governance side of it, which is really how are we going to make sure that this is sustainable and is something that is going to work for not only IT, but the end users in the long haul.
Yeah, so that upfront planning is really what you're talking about, and it's super important to have a really clear strategy around that before you jump in and then find yourself dealing with governance issues that you didn't plan ahead for. And so on that side, you've got those concerns. But on the technical side, what other aspects do companies need to consider?
So there's several different ways you can go technically for sure. There's a lot of customization that can happen, not to the look and feel, but to the way that data is managed. But I would say the top two things that people should be considering are, number one, channel creation. By default, when you deploy Teams, if you do not put any restrictions around it in the admin center, anyone who has access to Teams can create a new channel. When you create a new channel, you get a mail-enabled security group, you get a SharePoint site collection, you get a whole new permissions set, and you get basically its own environment. And what has happened as people have had to turn it on as needs must is they're finding that within day 3 or 4, they've got 200 new site collections that they now have to manage. So defining exactly how you're going to allow channel creation to happen, whether you want to create it process-based, role-based, or whether or not you want it to be an open forum, should be an intelligent decision before you roll it out. And then one of the other key things that I definitely think is something that people should take advantage of is within the Teams admin center, you have your entire app management. So people are used to SharePoint apps and used to Microsoft apps, which are sometimes intrinsic and sometimes third-party applications that can be integrated with the solution. Now, Teams allows you within the admin center to be able to limit those. And if people are helping themselves to help on the web and saying, okay, well, I want to do this, and so what app works for me, they might find some answers. And if you have that available in your app catalog, they may integrate it into their Teams solution. If they do that, then naturally it should be assumed that you're going to have to support it. So I would encourage the IT staff to take a look at their app catalog before they roll it out and restrict the ones that they're not prepared for, that they're either not prepared for or they do not want their end users to use from either a security or usability standpoint. That is a very easy governance blanket that you can help yourself to.
Yeah, and it sounds like what you're really describing are some of the best practices regarding governance, right? So, are there any other key, any key practices that we think are important to remember?
Oh, sure. So, as I mentioned before, communication is absolutely key. Your end users need to know what's happening, when it's happening, what it brings to the table for them, and any impact that it may have for them, and then ways to mitigate that impact. So I very much encourage a good communication plan. And if IT doesn't have the bandwidth for that, I encourage you working with your marketing, your admin teams, somebody who speaks the language of your users. And as far as like the integration side of it, definitely start taking a look at exactly how you're going to make sure that people have that seamless integration. So a lot of people got really used to having that one button push when they were in Outlook to be able to say, schedule a Skype meeting. Well, Teams does have that available, but you have to make sure that it's integrated in order to give people that same one-for-one experience. So that's one of the examples of things that I'd take a look at from integration. And then always take a look at your security. There's a lot of different ways we can go with it. Teams is naturally secured via the Microsoft Cloud, so people have to have their authentic logon. So you're already compliant with a lot of those Department of Defense standards and a lot of audit standards. But you can take it a step further if you want to, and enable multi-factor authentication, which comes naturally with that level of licensing. There are other options if you need a more secured platform. And then definitely governance. Definitely you have to have a plan in order for it to be successful. So take a look at what your governance strategy looks like and put together your committee. Talk about the people who make decisions and talk about the people who have to execute them. And there's a great exercises that we can take you through in order to go through that. But it's certainly the recipe for success.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And you're really saying is you really got to involve the employees in the discussion as part of that strategy, because employees in the hybrid environment have several things that are really important to them, right? They want to have more control over their work environment. They want to extend connectivity with their peers. They want better integration, right? They want to be able to get to those apps and that data easily and quickly. So when we think about recommendations that we would make for companies, we recommend thinking about this from moving from an office-centric design to a human-centric design. And what we're really saying is, office-centric models are what we've all been used to, whereas a human-centric design really thinks about the individual need and how that employee experience, how to make that more positive, right? And so, because we're no longer depending solely on one location and we're moving more fluidly between multiple locations, we think, and I think it's really important to understand that listening to what the employees think and how they work and understanding that human-centric model is really, really important. And when you do that, you're providing more flexible work experience, you're enabling, more intentional collaboration, which is super important for productivity. And you're really hoping to deliver more performance through those outcomes. And so we had a poll leading up to the event, and I wanted to share that poll with you today because I think it reflects very accurately what we're talking about. And we looked at what our poll results were, and the majority of the results say that virtual meeting fatigue is the biggest challenge. And we talked about that, and we also talked about connecting with other colleagues. We talked about accessing critical data, and you can see those are the top responses to our poll. So I think that's a reflection of what we've been talking about. So when when you think about that, Whitney, what feedback have you been hearing from employees about remote and hybrid work environments?
So over about like the last 10 years, the office space went from an office to an open concept. And then what we did was technology came in order to kind of fill in those gaps, because when you open up your workspace, you have a little bit of a lack of privacy. And then now that we're doing the work from home, technology is stepping in again in order to be able to create or recreate that collaborative work environment that people got used to with that whole open office concept. So giving people the ability to immediately reach out to people. Meeting fatigue is nothing new. It's always been first and foremost when it comes to end users, and that just has to do with the way that they're stacked. But I would say that Teams has come up with some great innovative solutions in order to be able to make that a little bit more interactive and be able to make it a little more interesting, so that people stay engaged in the meetings and don't feel like it's a chore meeting, feel like it's more of a collaboration meeting, and feel like it's more cutting edge of technology. So it's really about the evolution of the way that we have worked through the office into the home, back into the office, and continue that fluidity.
Right. Well, thank you for that, Whitney. And we really appreciate all this great information you've provided today. And as a reminder, if you have any questions for us, you can enter those right in the comment section below. And we appreciate any comments or any questions you might have. If we don't get to them today during our live stream, we'll definitely reach out and make sure we can answer your questions. So if you think of something even after the event's over, please feel free to comment in our thread, and we'll be happy to get back to you. So as we kind of summarize today a little bit about what we've been discussing and what we're finding, I wanted to share some key findings that I was able to discover doing some research around this topic. And it's very interesting because our poll gave us a really good insight to what people are thinking. So let's take a look at some of the key findings regarding hybrid work environment and enabling teams. So when we look at those findings, what we really found is, compared to an office-centric design, human-centric really is the way to do it, because that's one way you can reduce that virtual fatigue that we talked about. It also has an opportunity to increase intent to stay, so you have a little bit less risk of losing key employees. And the real important piece is that you can boost performance, right? That's really what the bottom line for a lot of companies is. So we really want to make sure that companies are looking at what the benefits can be and how they can actually, boost performance, reduce fatigue, and keep employees happy at the same time. So thank you again, Whitney, for your expert advice today. Could you summarize some of the key takeaways from today's discussion?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. One of the things that's nearest and dearest to my heart is governance, especially when it comes to teams. There is a lot of planning and a lot of technical aspects to consider when it comes to rolling these out, communicating them, and executing them successfully. So I would really encourage people to take a focus on that, whether it is internally or with an expert. I'm absolutely happy to run everybody through it. As I mentioned, it's one of my favorite things to do. The other takeaway is definitely double up on your communication. Let your end users know what's happening, when it's happening, how they can self-help, how they can get help, and how they can get trained on it. We want to make sure that we don't impact productivity, because that's always the most important thing. They've been doing their job for a long time. We want to make sure they continue to do it with that sort of seamless transition. So communication is always key. And then one of the other things is focus on ways that this can actually help you moving forward. Teams is a very robust platform. There are a lot of things that maybe you weren't aware that Teams could do for you. Anything that's paper can be replaced. how can we actually improve your day-to-day business processes and make sure that not only is this sustainable moving forward, but that you're actually able to shave off even more time of somebody's days by not requiring a physical signature or something like that. There's a lot of different opportunities that we have, because as we mentioned, this is the new normal. Employees expect it to stay, organizations need to plan for it to stay, and it can really increase your not only your user base, but it can increase your employee satisfaction by making sure that this is an availability for your organization.
Well, I think that's a great way to segue into our next event. So thank you again, Whitney. Your insights are extremely helpful, and I hope our audience was able to get some value from that today. So as we wrap up today's live stream, I did want to remind everybody that we will be live again in 2 weeks for part 2 of our discussion around the future of work and Microsoft Teams. And in this episode, we're gonna dive into applications and customizations for Teams. So we really thank you once again for joining today. Have a great day, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.